Paul Charles, did you ever force Prince to sit outside the venue in a limousine?
Not that I'm aware of.
Yeah.
Although I do remember he used to do these after-show shows. And when we were playing the Earls Court in London, he did which was then called the Music Machine in Camden Town. And an artist I was working with at the time, Tanita Tickerham, and I went along to it. She was invited by the record company, but supposedly through Prince. But anyway, my memory of the night is Prince running around the venue all night after Tanita.
Right.
You know, and Tanita was kind of
Yeah, so there's been a lot of no to Prince. Yeah, we're doing a t-shirt from this book. Just say no. Yeah, so Paul just casually mentioned the fact that he's probably the only Irish person who managed a female act who went to #1 in Britain. Tanita, I think is that the only artist that you managed at that era?
Yes, yeah.
So,
I thought you were kind of going there that she was the only artist that got to #1 as people.
No, but with an Irish manager, so that's remarkable. So, Paul, like, what's your background? Like, where did music come into your life, and where do you grow up?
I grew up in Northern Ireland, in a wee village called Magherafelt, about 30 miles outside of Belfast. And when I was young, I remember two things actually. One was a connection we do have, that we didn't know we had, was when I was about 10 years old. My only ambition in the world was to be a member of the Royal Canadian Mounted Police.
Wow.
And I don't know why, but I kept it up for at least 12 months, and then I realised, no, too far away. But anyway, I wasn't really into music. I mean, if I heard music and it was pleasing, that was okay. And if it wasn't pleasing, it didn't bother me. I just turned myself off to it. And my mum was a fan of music, Frank Sinatra, Tony Bennett, but particularly Emile Ford and the Checkmates. I'd love to get you in a slow boat to China. What do you want to make his eyes at me for? So she always had the radio on the off chance she was going to hear one of these artists. And I walked into the house one day. I was out running around or whatever I was doing, and there was a sound for a change. There was a sound on the radio that was so pleasing, so hypnotic, so melodic, so just it kind of really meant that I was experiencing feelings I'd never felt before. I'd never known anything to do that to before, and it was the Beatles. And it wasn't a life-changing moment in that I decided there and then I was going to try and get into the music business, because, you know, coming from Magherafelt, well, how would you ever get into this monster called the music business? How would you, you couldn't do an exam for it or whatever. But I just remember that it was kind of, okay, this, it's like, I suppose maybe the same hit that people get from chemicals or alcohol or whatever, but it had that big a movement, and then that's why I became a Beatle fan and fan of music and whatever. And then a mate of mine, he played guitar, had formed a wee group, and they were great at rehearsing. They rehearsed all the time, but they never played any I was going to say gigs, but in those days they were called bookings, but I happened to know a guy that played saxophone in a breakaway show band. So I went and knocked on his door and said, look, it's these mates of mine, and they're rehearsing a lot, and they're really good. It's called the Blues by Five, really brilliant lead singer. And he said, yeah, sure, yeah. So, the true show band tradition, he took his diary out and he said, okay, so I can give you March the 13th, April the 12th, and he was kind of reading off 3 or 4 shows. So I went back to the band, to their next rehearsal, which was the next day, as all rehearsals were the next day. And I said, I've got you some of these bookings, with the break. I said, okay, good, you'll be the manager then. And I was 15.
Fantastic.
But it was kind of, the same thing is that I enjoyed doing it because I wanted to hear them performing in front of an audience. I wanted to hear how that might transform them. How, it's one thing rehearsal and sound good in a rehearsal room, but taking that big step across the divide and having an audience there. And so since then, I've done, I've been a manager and a promoter and whatever, but the thing I really love doing is being an agent. I found out and I was very good at it. I was great at filling up the sheets, and with for small bands, that's really such a big turn on, because, you know, later on you've got your records out, you're selling whatever, and gigs come easy. But when you're starting off, like, how do you get a gig, you know? And so I always knew how to fill did sheets, and that was kind of the thing that pleased the musicians the most. And then so it really, and at none of those times that when I was even speaking to Dixie from the Breakaways, I was not thinking, okay, this is the way I can get into shows, this is the way I can become a manager, this is the way I can do it. This was really a way I could continue to hang out with my mates. Yeah. That's what it was about, you know. And so since then, really, I can't play music, I can't sing, but I do have a knack for helping people to make music, get up on the stage and make a bit of a record.
Lovely. So you're still hanging out with your mates.
Yeah.
You've made a career of that. You work with a really pivotal Irish, you know, progressive rock band called Fruupp. You go to London. You're based in London. Fruupp. They don't generate enough revenue for everyone to make a comfortable living, but you find that you're good at filling up booking sheets for bands. Little fast forward, there's an American boogie band, the George Hatcher Band, who don't sell records, but they're very well known when you go and see them, because they put on a great show. And you're their agent, and the record label then say something really interesting to you about a new band.
Yeah. I mean, again, actually, George Hatcher Band around Asgard used to be called the Margaret Thatcher Band.
Okay.
That's huge a sense of humour we did or did not have, you know.
They should have toured Ireland as the Margaret Thatcher Band. They're huge.
Yeah, exactly. But anyways, they were one of those great bands, a bit like Rory Gallagher, a bit like Eric Bibb, a bit like Robert Cray. As an agent, all you have to do is put them on stage, and they do the rest. The phone starts ringing. You know, when you go and see Rory Gallagher, go and see Taste. It's like it was just an experience, it was a religious experience. It was kind of, you know, just so. And the thing about Rory is, he didn't play to the audience. He played with the audience. They were a big part of the evening's success. You know, and again, George Hatcher Band, the same thing. Great. He was an American blues singer, a boogie singer, and he was clever enough to come over. It'd be a harder road for him to make it in America, so he came over to England, crashed with friends, and found a band from Birmingham. That's not Birmingham, Alabama, but Birmingham, England. Yeah. And he made them his backing band, and then so they would send to United Artists. I knew United Artists very well for a couple of other acts I worked with, Elvis and Nick Lowe, actually, you know, it's a big group, family of people. So anyway, George Hatcher's working away, did sheets filled, he's starting to sell records because he's selling tickets, you know, which is it's a magic word of mouth thing. You know, record companies will spend a lot of money promoting acts, you know, that they think are going to work, and they don't work, and they don't realise that they're not working because the audience don't want them. Yeah. You know, it's not, you can't buy your way out of this, you know. So anyway, I got a call from Andrew, as you said, a very nice man, a great music man, a big fan of music. And he said, oh, can you come around for a meeting? You know, and I said, yeah, of course. I said, oh, so we do it next week? He said, no, actually it's quite urgent, can you come around today, you know? I said, okay. So I wandered around, and I was thinking as I wandered around, you know, it's a wee bit early for George to be making a second record, because this one's doing really, really well, you know. So I go to Andrew's office, and he says, okay, I said, well, George yeah, no, I don't talk, it's not about George. We have this other band that we can't get arrested. You know, they've got an agent, they're not doing any gigs, they can't get any gigs at all. You know, we saw what you did with George Hatcher, with Fruupp, with, you know, would you be interested in taking them on? And I said, well, can you play me some of the music? And he played me 3 tracks, you know, which were brilliant, and it was the Buzzcocks. And they just kind of literally just walked right into it and took them on. And I just saw the Buzzcocks as being, it didn't matter what era they were in, they were just a great band. They had a great sound, and Pete Shelley, an incredible songwriter, you know. And then so we had the Buzzcocks, and as an agent, your biggest adverts in the world are your artists, you know. And so, you know, there was this band, a very exciting band. A friend of mine from Queen's University sent me over their Teenage Kicks EP. And these guys, they grew up 30 miles from where I grew up. And I'm going, how did these guys make a record that's a world beater? Anybody at all could put their name to this. This is just incredible. So I wanted to you know, find a way to work with them. So I contacted them, got in touch, and again, being the Undertones, they love to take the piss out of everybody, including themselves, you know, and anybody else who may be around. But it's just, it went on for about an hour, and I went, okay, and I thought, well, my East card is, at that point I was also representing Van Morrison. So I thought, maybe they'll come with me because I got Van Morrison. So anyway, we went on and on. He said, look, Paul, of course we're going to work with you. You work with the Buzzcocks. and that's what, you know, that's really how it works out. You've got somebody, you work with somebody, you work with Van, you get to work with other people, you know, and again, it's not something you can plan. You can't sit down and plan, well, I'm going to take on, like the first band I took on was a Scottish trad band called the Boys of the Loch. And through the Boys of the Loch, one of their best mates was a guy called Loudon Wainwright III. And it leads like that. It's not that, well, take this and this, it's just, you kind of, you're lucky, there's a lot of luck involved. I mean, big luck. I remember for years I've been trying to make contact with Don Waits, you know, and I couldn't. A manager would become his ex-manager, a lawyer would become his ex-lawyer, an accountant would become his ex-accountant, and I just wasn't making any, and I just couldn't do it, I couldn't find a way. And I was in America once doing my usual round of meeting all the different agents of different people that we work with. And first thing I would do, a lot of people from Ireland and England do when they go to LA, they go straight to Tower Records, because right across the road from Tower Records is Bookshop. So you kind of, your head turns, you can spend an afternoon and trying to get over jet lag. And anyway, I go into Tower Records and I get all these posters and album sleeves for Once in the Heart, the album that Tom and Crystal Gale did together. You know, and I couldn't find in any of the racks, any of the sections. So I got to the musical section, up to solo artists, male artists, female artists, American artists, whatever, and I couldn't find that. So I got up to the lady behind the counter and I said, look, you see the Tom Waits and Crystal, do you have any copies of that? And she goes, look, I'm really sorry, but I've just sold the last copy of it. And don't look now, but the person I sold it to was Tom Waits, and he's right behind you. And so you go, introduce yourself, and luckily enough, Tom and his wife, Kathleen, had heard of my act to try and make it. So we went out, I had a cup of tea, and 4 cups of tea later, I became their agent, and I've remained ever since. But that's just, you can't calculate that. That's just luck. That's just, you know, you're certainly in the right place at the right time, and it's a joy.
It certainly is, but it's not luck. It's because you were so good at what you did, and you know, with that, you happen to have that chance encounter, which is fantastic. But meanwhile, back over here, no one will come to Ireland. Gary Glitter, yes, early. And then the Miami show band, Massacre. No foreign band wants to come to this country because they think that they're going to get blown up. They're terrified. They are used to an Ireland that comes to them from the worst part of the news. It's a good era for our trad bands, for Planksty, for Moving Hearts, because there's a demand for live music, but no one's coming. Elvira down in Cork tries to put on bands, and they cancel, you know, 2 days before. She sells out City Hall in Cork, and the band cancel with no notice. So Elvira, as a teenager, spends her entire day handing money back to people who are there to see the gig. So we're completely backward. And then something really interesting happens that changes lots of lives, and that's that punk explosion. There's a university circuit, and the bands don't want, even the punk bands, the Stranglers I'm thinking of, don't want to come to Ireland because they're afraid. and you go and you talk to them. And what were those conversations like, and what happens?
I mean, again, I just explained to them that Ireland, which is well known, the island of Ireland, not Northern Ireland or Southern, the island of Ireland, has always been big supporters of music, of all music. People, you know, they kind of don't poo-poo anything that they don't like. It's just music. They're into music, you know. And so I just want to say, look, you know, this is the only place in Ireland at the minute, you know, the venues is where both communities mix. You know, they get together and nothing happens apart from people enjoying music, you know. And so I kind of chatting away to their manager, Di, and the band, and then, okay, well look, we'll go to Ireland if you travel around in the back of the van with us, you know. Yeah, okay, can't be anything. And away we go, because at that point I built up a circuit of all the colleges and universities in Ireland. And also before that, before that, these are powerful things, you know.
Yeah.
They're not sticks. So you could, but before that, Ireland sadly had a reputation of dodgy show band promoters who were putting groups on in the ballrooms and maybe wouldn't pass over all the money or whatever, or maybe you had to chase the money, you know. Whereas the campus circuit was really together, very together. The money was safe, they were well looked after, the audience were well looked after. So we kind of built up the circuit, and we went from that to doing Elton John, you know, doing Eric Clapton quite regularly, you know, all on this circuit. Because again, you go to any of those concerts in Dublin, you know, and you see Loudon there, or you see Tom Waits, or you see, it's incredible, because it's that Rory thing. It's, you know, the audience aren't distant, the audience are part of the gig, the audience are part of the show, you know. And it's a really, really intelligent, warm audience to play to. You know, it's kind of they're right there. You don't like. I think a lot of the acts that I work with, one of the things is that, you know, you have to realise and accept, you know, people don't go to gigs to judge you. They go to gigs to enjoy you. You know, so because it takes away a lot of the pressure. Like, how are we going to go down tonight? Or did we heard it before? The last time we played wasn't a month ago, whatever. It's like, no, that's not the way it works. People spend their hard-earned cash to go out and enjoy themselves, you know, and they're not judging you. And it kind of, when you kind of get beyond that, then the gigging, as with people like the Hot House Flowers, is just a joy for the band as well as for the audience.
Now, it's funny that both you mentioned joy, performer and booking agent, and I know that we've well-known scammers in the room, John Fleming, Gary O'Neill, who were trying to get into gigs for free. So they're wrecking the music industry while you're doing your best to build it up. But the National Stadium, we're starved for live entertainment, so people tend to go to the gigs and they're very passionate. So the National Stadium, mid to late 70s, did you bring Emmylou Harris over?
Yep.
Did you bring Roy Cooder over?
Several times.
And they become they become bigger here,
yeah,
you know, per capita than they were anywhere else,
yeah,
because you're bringing these bands.
Well, I mean, Garth Brooks broke through Ireland.
Yeah.
You know, it became, you know, what Maggie sells out as many football stadiums as he wants to play.
Yeah, and I forgive you for that. But, you know, there's loads of positive. Yeah. No, there's positive things as well. No, you know, and that is remarkable. You know, that story, that trajectory, like David Craig. You know, were the things that break out of Ireland in terms of Europe. So you bring the Stranglers. What other punk bands or new wave bands from that era do you remember bringing to Ireland?
Well, most of the ones I work with, which would be Penetration, Gang of Four, the Human League, Radiators from Space. Yes, it's kind of the Lurkers, 999. Most of them. I mean, I think we were very, very lucky. Again, the same thing. We were very, very lucky in that when Andrew Lauder made the call about the Buzzcocks, you know, the whole industry was like behaving with the Buzzcocks. it's punk. No, we don't want that. We don't want messing with venues. No, we don't want any of that. You know. So it was really, none of the ages were onto it yet. So I could see, you know, the Buzzcocks were actually, the first time they went out with them, they were actually doing serious numbers. Yeah. The first time the Undertones came over here, they'd never played a gig here. John Peel had played them repeatedly, and the first time he played Teenage Kicks, he made the legendary statement, "This is so good, I'm going to play it again," and play it again immediately, which was unheard of, you know. So they were doing business. Then kind of, because of that, and because we had these bands, everybody else was kind of knocking on our door. And then by the time the rest of the music business and promoters caught on to the fact that Buzzcocks, the Undertones, were actually selling out 2,000 capacity venues, you know. Oh yeah, maybe a little bit of this, but we had really all the pickling. Apart from the Pistols. Yeah. Pistols were with Derek Block. Yeah.
Now, every time Paul says we were very lucky, like I'm getting AI and I'm putting it over the tape, and it's going to be we were very smart, and we were also very nice people to deal with, because you were, you know, so you were making those lucky moments. You completely changed Ireland's culture by bringing bands that were likely to be on top of the pops, by young bands like Penetration, like the Stranglers, and for us to have bands that were going to be on top of the pops, that had never happened in Irish history before. So I will give you credit, and people should know that.
Yeah, but Michael, you're very kind, but also you have to realise there were people like Magherafelt. Yeah. There were people like the Queen's University, like Gary Mills. Yeah. There were people like Trinity, Ian Wilson. You know, there was people like that. In every city that had a university or college. So, you know, I couldn't have done it. You know, I would have been kind of not preaching, but you can go back to the ballroom people again, and then be going, well, we'll put them on and see what happens. You know, but if they impact our lemonade sales, we'll have to dock them. You know, you know. I mean, I remember we did a show once with Fruupp. They came back to England. You know, they were one of those bands that were kind of big, you know, in a few areas. You know, and anyway, they were coming back as a big band from London, even though they were on the poverty line in London. And we played for Sammy Bar and the Flamingo Ballroom. And it was sold out. And I was going to, you know, hoping to get a wee bit, because you didn't get percentage, but you got a wee bit of a bonus. And I said to Sammy, so maybe a few bob extra for the lads for tonight. He said, Paul, I don't know, it was so packed, nobody could get near the lemonade stand. Honestly, that's funny, but it's not a joke. That's the way they behaved, you know. That's really the way it worked, you know. And when it came to paying the bands were last on the list, you know. So all those people, you know, that we talked about, they were all vital in this, in making this happen. They were all vital in helping, you know, the punk movement through. And I also, as well, I was kind of saying that, you know, in my book, like the same with you know, John O'Neill from the Undertones, you know, John O'Neill could be writing for them back in the 60s. You know, like, can you imagine Van and them doing Teenage Kicks? It would be #1 all over the world. It really would have, you know. So we're just talking about Ray Davis, in my opinion, was a punk, you know. Bob Dylan is a punk, you know. Elvis pretended to be a punk, I think. That's Costello, not president. And so it was kind of, you know, all of these acts were all just great acts. That era, that all those people spoke about earlier on today, you know, that was a golden era. You know, that was like really, you know, nobody accepted it at the time, because the punks were certainly the outlaws, weren't welcome in a lot of places. But that was a golden era. Think of all the trash, you know, the Stranglers. I mean, the Stranglers live, man, was like, it was like seeing, you know, the wall of sound that you never thought you'd hear, and it was all note perfect. It was like you had the band sound, and then you had the sound of the instruments, and the both of them do this. It was like Phil Spector live on stage. You know, you've lost that love and feel live. You know, it's like, so it was really, really a very, very special time. You know, and I think it's actually quite magic that you've gathered this group of people for your child. I think you deserve a lot of credit for that.
Yes.
it's very nice. Moving on. We have a much better music industry than we deserve, thanks to people like Paul. End of that conversation. We do have to wrap it up, but I'm aware that I forgot that this is a music book festival, and Paul has a brilliant new book. And Paul, in addition to being this incredibly nice person and a nurturer of talent, writes brilliant detective books. And they're generally set in the pub rock era in London, or now gone back home to golf, to Port Rush during golf tournaments. And I grew up, my grandfather loved two things. He was in the old IRA, and then he became a guard in the Free State. And he loved cowboys and detectives. And so he had like all those books growing up, and they were cool. Like, you know, we were young and we'd read them. And he had this thing called Ellery Queen Mysteries. And there were compilations of really great little detective stories. And because I was a punk when I was 5, before punk came along, I hated cowboys. Like, I thought they were wankers. But I really liked detectives. And I was flicking through the Ellery Queen, you know, the compilations, like, and they pick the best detective writing from around the world. And our man who brought the Stranglers to Ireland is in there, like, with these other great detective writers. So here's what I'm saying. Anyone who's here or who's not here, who is a punk, and you don't own a Paul Charles detective book, you're not real. You know, so I highly recommend. I love them, but then I really thinking that's the Stranglers bloke as well. So absolute pleasure to have the two of you, and you both made really big efforts to be here in our inaugural festival. Huge thanks to both of you. And Tara, you're going to do a song to close it up.
One more?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
All right. Thank you.
No, thank you. And then Steve Averill is come on after that, and he won't be singing.
We got that right.
All right.